So I have had, and my kids unfortunately, have had lots and lots of colonoscopies because I had an early onset advanced adenoma. And that's important to remember that it's not just early onset colon cancer, but early onset advanced adenomas are a real risk, and they appear to be on the rise as well. So because of that, I had lots and lots of colonoscopies over the years. Eventually I had enough adenomas to qualify for genetic testing. So I had genetic testing with no known cause of the polyposis that I had. A lot of people here said, isn't it ironic? You worked on colon cancer prevention all your life and you get colon cancer. And I have to make it very clear, this is not a failure of colon cancer screening. And I am a strong advocate for colon cancer screening. This is an interesting story and a great story, one of the most impactful days of my entire life, in all honesty. This was as a Colon Congress meeting, Fight CRC, several years ago. And I've been asked to give a talk about the process that the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force and the American Cancer Society went through to make recommendations about when colon cancer screening should start. The audience was filled with families and patients who'd had colon cancer at a young age, and they were challenging the question of why is the recommendation to start at age 50? Why isn't it younger than that? And so my goal was to try to explain the process about how there's a careful literature review done, and they commission modelers to try to make the decisions about the best place to start. And as I was in the middle of this, one of the advocates, what was her name?
Carlene Taylor.
Carlene Taylor. One of the advocates, Carlene Taylor, stood up in the middle of my talk and said, "What are you thinking? People are dying out there." And so I was stunned, actually, because it's pretty unusual to get yelled at from the audience in these scientific meetings. But anyway, we discussed through that, but it was stunning to me. And it made me think more critically about what the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force guidelines were. And so I went back and looked, and I knew that they had not taken into account several factors that might have changed the way they made recommendations. They hadn't taken into account gender. We know that colon cancer is more common in men than women. They hadn't taken into account race, and we know at least some studies that show African Americans have earlier onset colorectal cancer. And they didn't break down their models by gender or by race. But in addition, when I went back, I realized that the incidence and mortality data that they used for the modeling that was given to the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force used incidence and mortality data from 1970 to 1979. Before we began to see this big increase in early onset colorectal cancer. And so they asked me to call Ann Zauber, who was one of the main modelers, and she said, "Funny, the American Cancer Society has asked us already, and we've almost completed modeling using gender and race." And they did complete that model, and that showed that African Americans could justify starting African Americans at age 45 rather than age 50. But I said, "But what about this incidence and mortality data?" And they said, "Well, we didn't do that. Or they didn't ask us to do that." And said they didn't ask us to do that. And I said, "Well, what if we asked you to do that?" And then we went to talk to Bob Smith at the American Cancer Society and explain the whole thing. And he was anxious to get their guidelines out, but he realized that this was potentially a really important issue. And so he said, "Actually, we'll fund the group to go back and use incidence and mortality data, more modern incidence and mortality data." So they used the data from Becky Siegel at the ACS to allow them to do that. And that was the basis, that modeling was the basis for the change in recommendation from the American Cancer Society to start at age 50 to changing it to starting at age 45. So I tell you that story for 2 points. One is that an individual with passion can make a difference, because she made me go back and look more carefully. She made me rethink it. She shook my foundations in a way. And the second is that an organization like Fight CRC can make a huge difference, sometimes with not I don't know that we gave any money to this. I think we just made the good suggestion to the right people and got it done. And it's made a big difference in colon cancer screening. To my mind, this is the one thing we can do right now to make the biggest impact on early onset colorectal cancer. There are other things that are important. Finding out the cause is important. Taking a better family history is still important. And we're beginning to understand some other risk factors as well. But I think the thing that we could do right now that would make the biggest impact would be to advocate hard for the starting age of 45.